Welcome to Cookies Enabled. Here we're going to be talking about all kinds of science and technology related topics, as well as history and how they all relate together. So stick around and see what kind of awesome episodes we're going to be having coming up for you, and I hope to see you there. So, what does 5G really mean? Well, the G actually means generations, which is the evolution of our wireless communications over the years. Obviously, started with 1G, which is pagers and really basics, maybe car phones at the time. 2G, which was just a little bit broader and could span larger cities. And then 3G, which everybody's known of and is probably the most familiar with, as well as 4G, which obviously came just a couple years after 3G and increased greatly the broadband connection that we had over 3G. Most people that still have phones today all still have a 3G, 4G, and some have a 5G antenna. And that's okay, because your phone is going to actually juggle which connection is best. If you're in a city that has a better 3G connection than a 4G connection, then it will actually definitively use one connection over the other for voice calls, for data, depends on where you are. So where does 5G fit into all of this? So 5G is going to be great for really small communities as well as big cities that have the ability to set up an infrastructure that can actually support having multiple towers in a smaller area doing more coverage. So how does that work? Let's say you're in Chicago. They will put one main antenna probably on one of the biggest towers in that city, and then use repeaters on the smaller towers and the smaller buildings to help get into those little crevices where the signal is not normally going to reach, because of the fact that it is interfered with by buildings and trees and all kinds of just random, really anything that's grounded is going to block a 5G signal. So one way around that is the companies will put more repeaters up in smaller towns, and a lot of schools have already started doing this in places like Texas and Arizona to help broadcast over wide areas that don't have buildings and don't really have forests. They might have mountains off in the distance, but they're too far to be affected by 5G. So does that mean that maybe 5G is actually dangerous? Well, no. And then back in 2000, Dr. Bill P. Curry came out with a graph that showed that at certain megahertz rates and gigahertz rates of 5G, 6G signals and whatnot, you can actually burn skin and do all kinds of crazy things. None of this is legitimate, since our own skin and bones actually help repel and dissipate all radiation from our own flesh. It's just natural, since we get so much radiation from the sun that our body has built up these defenses over millions of years. So obviously the doctor didn't really think about these precautions, and when he did his testing, there was no skin and no bones in any of the tests. It was just pure flesh. And so going back to the mobile spectrum and what our phones use currently to communicate with the towers, we are currently using a 700 megahertz spectrum all the way up to 3.8 gigahertz spectrum. So none of those spectrums there are anywhere close to the ionizing spectrum. And the ionizing spectrum is way past the 750 terahertz range, which we are gigahertz away from those range by hundreds and hundreds of gigahertz. So your wave looks more like this instead of like this. You know, that's the one that's going to boil you. Our waves are nice and wide and big, and they just travel right through everything that we need, and they don't interfere with much, especially the 3 and the 4G. They just kind of travel right through most medians. 5G is the only one that has that trouble of getting through buildings, and that's because it's such a high frequency that it can't really get through some material without completely dissipating into the material. So they also added a few extra bands, which is the 26 gigahertz band, the 40 gigahertz band, and 66 gigahertz band. Now you're thinking, oh my gosh, those are so much higher than the 3.8 gigahertz band that our normal phones are using, and you are right. but they are still normally, completely safely within regulations, and they are not exceeding anything that's going to damage you, your pets, your family, your friends, even your inanimate objects will not even notice this signal at all. Again, until you're getting up into the X-ray and gamma rays is when things are really going to start hurting you, your loved ones, and inanimate objects. But we aren't even close to those ranges. Yeah, I guess one of my biggest pet peeves for the cell phone would definitely be the fact that I've got to download like a different stupid app for everything. I can't have a calculator built into my phone. It literally is a calculator. I have to download something to teach it how to do math to me. That like kind of blows my mind, because that's literally all it's designed to do is do math, and yet I still have to download 100 different apps. If I want to turn a flashlight on, gotta get an app. Take a picture, gotta get an app. Like, why? Why can't I just have one thing? That's what my PC used to do. So why do I have to have a phone that has to have 800 apps to do one thing? This doesn't make any sense. Whew.